Hey all, welcome to what is now our fifth annual event on empowering learners for the age of AI. We are just shy of fully selling out, if you will. I think we've got room for another 15 people. That puts us at 1,500 for the year, which is what we've done every other year in the past. So I have no doubt probably by the end of this session, we'll be at our max. Appreciate everybody joining. And I want to just give you a little bit of background before I dive in to start a conversation with Rob. We've started the organization initially to try and provide some direction on how we can move forward in the space of AI. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But here's a little bit of who's represented. It is a global event. We've got North America here. Now, keep in mind, we've had 200 more registrants since this slide was put out, but it's worth emphasizing there's not an inconsequential representation from the major regions of the world. And one of the things I hope that you'll do is when you're in Hoover, make some of those connections, start some of those conversations. Saw a fantastic thread going on today about what kind of AI technologies are you using in your personal learning practices as well. And that's what these things are particularly good at. Like all of you, in some regard, hold a little bit of a key of knowledge that's going to make this a useful experience to someone else. We've curated what I think are outstanding panels, fantastic keynotes throughout this whole event, but much of the value that you're going to get are the people you talk to, the people you meet in the Hoover forums and so on. So really encourage you to dive into there and have some of those conversations. You should have all received some Hoover sign-up details, but if not, just go to the empoweringlearners.ai website and you can drop it in there. Much of the affiliation is university, but it's not exclusively. So we do have some representation in different sectors, industry through to K to 12 and so on. So we have a couple industry represented here, and then government agencies as well. Our original goal with Grail, and this was about, I don't know, we got to be almost 5 years ago now, was really to kind of solve this problem of universities aren't responding to AI as quickly or as effectively as they could. And we wanted to help guide and promote some of that research advancement, but also leadership development. We do a number of activities for those of you that are randomly interested, including this annual conference that you're in the middle of right now. There's a weekly newsletter that I do that specifically just looks at the state of AI and ways you might see that being of interest. It's one person's opinion. There's a number of different newsletters out there. Read broadly. We do a number of webinars and learning sessions. Some of you might recall about a year ago, we ran a series of sense-making webinars, once a month that looked at everything from critical perspectives on AI due to the idea of the AI first university. So there's tons of avenues and opportunities to dive in deeply. And we've also spent time co-locating with different conferences around the world, primarily targeting with the Society for Learning Analytics Research. And those of you that are going to be somewhere in some southern Nordic regions with us next year, Grace can drop a link in on that as well. We'll be able to join us for an AI Agents Academy that we're running there. All right, so thank you all. I can honestly say there are few people that I would like to hear more from than the person that's joining me on this discussion today. I've met Rob now. It's probably about 3.5 years ago when we first crossed paths, I think, 2.5, 3.5, either way. I've known him for a while and not nearly long enough, but from conversations I've had with him, meetings I've been in with him, he remains consistently one of the wisest and most informed voices just around centering humanity in the AI conversation. And I think we're all aware we're in the middle of a process of trying to make sense of exactly what AI is going to do to humanity. And we don't know. It's not preordained. We're going to shape it by the decisions that we make regularly. And so Rob is someone who I've drawn inspiration from and had fantastic insights from given his creative journey, which we're going to unpack today. But I think what I enjoyed most about the conversation is there's genuine curiosity and humility around the domains where we still don't quite have the answers. And so I think I would love to start with that as just an introduction to Rob. You have a fantastic history. You've worked with outstanding artists in the field. You run a creative studio that's done quite a bit of work in the ed tech space as well. So you're a perfect person to help sort of guide us through some of the grounding conversations we're going to engage with over the rest of this event. Rob, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, George. It's really great to be here.
So what I'd like to do is maybe if we can just start. So Rob English, who are you and how did you get here? Like, tell us your journey.
Oh man, I'm trying to think which version of this story do I share. So I'm a culture person, and I started my career. I'm from Chicago originally. I like to say that I was blessed enough to have been in the right place at the right time. In that I was sort of birthed at a newspaper in Chicago that was run by high school kids. So it was, from my 13 years old through, senior year in high school. I learned, the seeds of marketing, writing, graphic design. This is, ancient. So it's like the seeds of keyline and paste up, being on the tail end of that in the introduction to the Macintosh as the standard. And it was sort of there I got the seeds and the spark to really do creative and storytelling. And it really, I believe, set my life on the trajectory that I've been on to this day.
And so talk a little bit about that trajectory because one of the things I've found about you is you're needlessly humble and you need a little more hubris in your life. So who have you worked with? And theoretically, is it possible that you would have been engaging with someone who may or may not be doing a presidential library right now?
This is true. Who I work with, I've worked with so many people. I don't want to age myself, but I've worked with so many brands over the years and have been continue to be blessed with opportunities to be pivotal to Fortune 500 brands. To where George is implying, we're currently at the work and friends at work. We're working with the Obama Foundation in opening a presidential library next year, helping them with their narrative and storytelling and how that comes to life. But essentially, like a lot of the work that I have been able to do has been working with brands, social impact initiatives, and musical artists. So I've done, many marketing efforts for artists like Lady Gaga, John Mayer, Megan Trainor, done many activations with 50 Cent, Pharrell, Williams, just a lot of culture things over the years. And a lot of where my career has transitioned as being in these spaces where I'm able to sort of like leverage the things that I would bring to culture projects or pop projects and bring them into spaces where it aligns more so with my personal values. A lot of this has to do with the work I've done with John Legend for the last 10 years, and we can talk about that. But that's actually really how I got into the ed tech space.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic shift because I think obviously I'm interested in your creative process and how the creative process changes due to AI as sort of a cognitive presence in those areas. But before we move into some of those more practical questions, how ed tech? Because right now, from most people I've worked with in the field, they they have a slightly different trajectory. So how'd you get here?
Oddly enough, it's through, so like I said, my background's been in traditional advertising and marketing, working with, brands like Colgate and Dairy Queen and McDonald's and, just generally selling people a lot of things that they don't actually need, and getting to a place where my career transitioned more so to working directly with music artists. So it was the work when I would do marketing efforts for music artists, in addition to brands, it was really I would be brought into work that was whatever was important to them. And it just so happened I was working with an artist, John Legend, who I would say was as passionate about his social impact work as he was his musical work. So at a time when he's got his biggest song ever, this is circa 2015 with All of Me was, sort of becoming a phenomenon. He was, still doing work in the field and doing these efforts that, I was sort of brought into and really where I found this chapter of my career.
And so when you make that shift, then you're a big part of what you're doing in working with the creative agencies or the people that you've worked with is some intersection of narrative and story building and sort of creating a vision or driving a vision. When you engage with individuals in an ed tech space, what, how does that expertise reflect in the kind of work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I think, it's the it's the pleasure of being and the opportunity to be a culture guy my entire life, like, and being plugged into the vibration of the waves of how culture is moving, essentially how I translated being a cool guy into a career path, in the, being able to understand and tap into subcultures, cultural movements, happenings, trends, and follow those things deeply into understanding groups. So in the ed tech space specifically, a lot of the work that we would do would be about how do we create more understanding of the actual audiences that these ed tech companies or initiatives were trying to connect with. And in a lot of situations, there's this sort of gap between what is trying to be done and the actual realities of the audiences, their limitations, the things that they love. And because these are the things that we're competing with, I've always tried to, like I said, bring the same spirit from which we would do a Nike effort, or the same spirit from which we would do a musical effort for a hot new rap artist or whatever, and bring that to these things, like I said, that I care about and that, can actually be helpful to people's lives, but do it in a way that had the same texture, look,
Yeah.
feel, and narrative as these things that they were competing with, which was gaming, which was music. Um, so a lot of the projects that we've done in the edtech space, I've tried to infuse as much of that into it as possible.
That's terrific. And certainly I think as education, you see these apps, you see these experiences, people spend an insane amount of time in domains of entertainment and gaming. And we've long been chasing sort of that first hit of direct, sustained engagement with learners. And we haven't necessarily hit that by and large. In the ed tech space, maybe Duolingo and a few have managed to get the engagement right, but moving engagement through to actual direct learning can sometimes be an entirely different conversation. I've got a question here. I'm just going to read it out to you. So it says, Rob, in your work with artists, you've seen technology reshape creative expression. In adult learning, we're also using AI to help people rediscover purpose and voice. Do you think AI can actually help us become more human, more self-aware, and more empathetic, or does it risk flattening what makes us unique?
Mm, that's a great question. I think the truth of it is that it's going to depend on us at the end of the day, because I think that what AI is opening is the possibility for us to lose that sense of humanity and lose our ability to do very, very important actions and activities, because they're being offloaded to AI. Right now, large language models, like, just being like the ability to take so much of the weight. But I do think that it's gonna come back to our intention and sort of how we usher it into the world. And honestly, George, like, the work that, just being around you and learning um, from you about the hopeful possibilities of where this can go, I think that I personally believe that there's a lot of hope in where this can be taken to, in that, it creates an opportunity for us to sort of have to amplify the things that make
Yeah.
us more human.
Yeah, and I think, I very much agree with that. I think there's a capability where it's possible that it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's possible that AI may give us space to return to our humanity, meaning some of the things that we're doing now in work and even in school systems, they're focused on things that may not always have immediate impact on the lives of a learner, and in many cases are in the domain where AI is most competitive, namely cognitive tasks or the kind of things that you see in an average university classroom is
Mhm.
something where AI can perform well. A lot of it, and that's what I'm trying to get at this. aesthetic that you articulate so well, because learning really needs to be in the domain of those aesthetics. It needs to be in that domain of beingness, if you will, where it's who are we being as people? Who are we becoming? And it's almost like a shift from learning as knowledge acquisition to learning as an experience, whatever that means. I don't think we have the language yet to give clarity around the contours of what that is, but I think we can see at least pieces of that emerging.
Yeah, well, it's like one of the things that we have been focused on, even it sort of started with some of the work that I was doing with the MacArthur Foundation in early days with John was this idea of really thinking through how does learning uh, get, not like move out of the space of something that you do into something that you live, and in the
Yeah.
ways that other aspects of our lives are sort of driven, especially youth lives. And the notion there is like how is learning sort of transformed into a lifestyle. So when I think about, how does learning become a lifestyle, of course there are connections to like how that shows up as a cultural vehicle, and how we are able to, with the right attention and the correct references and textures and beautiful design and um, all the components, bring into it the elements that actually make it something, build a world that people can become a part of, not just
Mm.
move through as something that is a task that they have to check off and participate in, but it's something that they're choosing to identify with on a personal level. And
Yeah.
I think oftentimes like these things are designed without that in mind, and it is very it excludes a lot of people. But I do think the opportunity with AI just is this ability to be able to be more inclusive and bring more people into into more people into learning on their own terms, and that allowing it to really become this cultural thing that they can internalize.
And one of the things I appreciated in your thinking has been two components, and it'd be nice to hear you maybe unpack them a bit more. And you just raised one now, and it's this idea of learning as almost a type of a lifestyle brand. It's that learning as, I don't know, that fashion dynamic. And that relates to the second point that I hear you talk about often is this idea of beautiful learning. We spend so much of our time making learning a knowledge interaction process. This is what you need to know. This is how you need to think, or you need to be able to answer these questions to perform well in this field. And your framing has been a little different as I've heard you express it, the aesthetic of a beautiful experience. And obviously that comes from the artistic dynamic of what does it feel like when you're sitting in a John Legend event, or what does it feel like when you're in the audience and Lady Gaga is performing? There are dynamics there that raise the caliber of the experience to something that's, next level. So do you think that some of those dynamics from that, if we articulate that we are entering an experience economy, we're entering AI as an experience process, what would you say would be the salient learnings that we could carry over from the dynamics that you create in a concert or in any kind of a creative process, really, that moves learning into a lifestyle or even into a beautiful experience?
Yeah, I would break that down as I've said this before that sort of one of my mentors d- taught me that the way that your great branding is done through this formula, the EQI factor, in that it's a there's great brands have all three. Most brands only, if they're lucky, get a couple of these things. So there's the emotional factor. There's something about this brand, product, or service that meets some kind of emotional need for me. There's the Q, the quality factor. This brand or service meets the level of quality that meets my standards. But the really great brands throughout history have been the ones that meet the third, more elusive need, which is the identity need. And I sort of alluded to this, but it's like there's something about this that says something about me. There's something, this thing has allowed me to internalize it in a way that says something personal about me as an individual, that I can hold it up and let people know that I participating in this thing. I am a part of this movement. And I think largely education, they try to get at that. I think sort of, there's school spirit, and there are people that are very passionate about their learning experiences. But I don't think that this is a thing that most people are able to participate in, especially the people on the fringes of in some of the most vulnerable groups. And I think that there's this idea of being a learner that still has yet to be harnessed as a lifestyle in a way that I think it can be. And one of the things that I've been struggling to bring about into the world as is that notion that you know learning isn't something that you do; it's something that you live. And I think that that will never happen without the right frequencies and additions, to be more direct, of lifestyle components interweaved throughout it. And that has to be done with a deep understanding of culture.
Yeah, so has fantastic implications to how universities really operate or the learning system is. Because when I think of it right now, generally, if you're doing a learning design process, you're working with a learning designer. Some universities are a little more focused on the development of tools or resources, which AI enables now, have the capacity to maybe do some product building or some product culture. But I don't know of a lot of universities that have, say, I don't know what you would call it, the creativity architect or some flavor of that. And a core hypothesis I have is that as we see AI succeed more and more in human knowledge domains, the domain of aesthetics and culture and I'll use the word beingness again, but those are the domains we need to exist. So should
Yes.
universities be paying attention to bringing in that creativity architect in addition to the other roles? Like, how do we make this transition to an AI centric university?
Well, even just through the lens of thinking about how how we're able to allow people to be in a position. So as a creative person, they just released the Sora app, the update, and there's so many videos going around, and things are getting so great. And I will say that as a creative person, I'm not afraid of this at all. And I think largely what is happening is there's this, as you talk about this transition to our more of our humanity. I do think as even as a creative individual like myself, what it's doing is it's forcing me to lean into the aspects that are even more myself, that make up myself, my sense of
Mm.
person, my sense of history, my knowledge well, and my knowledge well that informs my point of view. So the ability to save and aggregate information is becoming less valuable, but what is becoming more valuable is the ability to dissect, or the ability to interpret, or the ability to infer from, and thus sort of redirect information. So, and
Mm.
that can, from my point of view, like that is I see that as sort of the piece that allows me to still sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. And it certainly was Sora and the anticipated AI slop that we're interacting with, that, and basically in some ways with Sora, we're probably just doing the fine tuning of that model by the things we like and the things we share. But it definitely raises questions. Like the Motion Pictures Association recently, I think it was today actually, wrote a letter to OpenAI to say like, hey, like it's on you to make sure that what you're doing is copyright adherent. It's not on artists to do that. So this is very
Mhm.
contested legal space. Um, Maybe if we can shift a little bit to a few questions that are asked here. So I'm just going to throw them at you pretty
Sure.
quick. They're going to be decontextualized questions, which means there's no theme or thread. So one question was, what are your thoughts on figuring out the ethical territories of AI being used in relation to the pressure to monetize and influence, the desire to support learning and growth, in particular, with an ethical approach to living and engaging with others?
Can you ask that again? That's a pretty
Sure.
loaded
So
question.
it's very loaded. So it's your thoughts on about figuring the ethical border territories of AI being used in relation to the pressure to monetize and influence. So you have this idea of growth and development in learning, and also there's the ethical dynamics of working and living and engaging with others. So I guess essentially the question is focusing on as you work and think with AI, where do you see the ethical boundaries are in the education sector?
Well, definitely the ethical boundaries are still being like figured out. Like in a lot of ways, it's just still the wild, wild west. In that, there's pieces of this that are lines that are being stepped over and things that are being broken as we're figuring out how to walk in a direction. I don't personally have a lot of insight into like the ethical boundaries of how this will affect education, but I do think that like what we are looking at as this transition of the, like you keep pointing to, it's like the transition of what matters most. And the piece that is the most important is that shift of thinking about, well, how do we think about what learning is?
Yeah.
And that's going to continue to sort of be this major piece that has to be unpacked um, in the most sensitive ways. But I did a lot of work with the company Chegg for some years in trying to figure out how learning could be, how they can really participate in learning in a way that wasn't something that ended up being uh, something that was cheated. In that, it's
Yeah.
not being a cheating tool; it's being an actual tool that helped gain more understanding, not limited it. But
Yeah.
again, it sort of goes back to sort of the parameters that we put in place. I don't think we're going to be able to run away from this. And I think largely it's going to, at the end of the day, come back to our all of our personal intentions in how we utilize these things. If we are smart, if we are wise in how we utilize these things, we will continue to grow in the ways that will matter most. If we continue to sort of like offload these things to the technology, in the end, we will lose.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because certain things can be offloaded. For example, if you got three papers you got to read or a bunch of news sources, that's the kind of fodder that is great. Just throw it out, summarize it. I don't have time to read it all, but I kind of want some of the gems of it. That's, you would think, an okay exchange for AI. Or if you're
Mhm.
a teacher in a classroom and you're like, I'd like to try a different kind of learning activity than what I've done so far. And you might ask for some ideas to sort of co-brainstorm how you can bring in new engaging learning activities into your classroom.
Mhm.
But when you start to get in the domain of experiences that hamper, I'll not quite sure if the right word would be, but metacognitive strategies. Like when you start to hinder the development of key things that will help us be better learners in the future. And I would argue things like self-regulation, the creative act, those kinds of activities, I'd start to feel like, ooh, like it's always, I guess, a trade-off between what are we gaining and what are we losing in the use of AI. So if we use it to brainstorm a new learning activity, we're gaining some perhaps innovative perspectives. We don't lose a ton. But if we're using it to control and take over self-regulation, we end up creating almost a toxic entanglement with AI where we can't perform as well without it in what are some pretty core human tasks, I would argue.
Yeah, and this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but it's like even to the extent to which we are like, I long believe that people don't cultivate in like intuition.
Mm,
And we're entering into this age with AI, in my opinion, where things like curation, things like taste, things
mm,
like not just the ability to present, but the ability to present the right things at the right times in the right ways through the right lenses. Like a lot of these things can and will need to be cultivated in ways that they haven't been to date. Like, and I do believe that like your intention, it's like a muscle, your instinct, and it's the ability to sort of tap into those things that as we are in the position of curators that are creating with much smaller teams than we have in the past because the technological capabilities are just so much more advanced that even as an owner of an agency, I know that I don't need 10 writers to work on a project. I may right now only need three. But I need
Mm.
three writers who are really well versed in how to use the AI tools in ways that are not just outputting headlines and creative, but they're able to discern headlines and creative that are output by the algorithms and being able to do so in a way that still meets the right quality level, still
Yeah.
meets the culture where it is, not where
Yeah.
it's been.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a critical focus. And I see there's a discussion happening in the discussion area around how comfortable people are with AI centric schools. And so there's a few questions going on. I'm not sure I'm feeling good about an AI centric school. Shouldn't we be focused on the students and their skills and knowledge? And bit of an exchange. There's one example that's common in K to 12 that's getting a lot of attention is alpha schools, which is basically based on a model of 2 hours of working directly with AI from an instructional process, and then much of the rest of the day is spent in purposeful activities or activities that can help you define your passions or put you in touch with nature, put you socially in touch with one another. Are you seeing in your own work, and this is going to be a very entangled question, Rob, but are you seeing in
Mhm.
your own work that view of how do you do enough AI to achieve a task, but not AI that sort of takes away your humanity, the idea of you need three writers rather than 10? Like, what are the implications of some of those? We can create more. Is it more humane? Is it more impactful? I think this is going to be any field, education, creative work, or even just business practices. Australia, just this week, one of the big consulting firms wrote a report, that they received was wrong citations. It was edited poorly. It was clearly AI generated, and a huge backlash as a government
Mhm.
issued report. So how do you feel about that entanglement between what AI does for us in a practical way, but human centered in another way? Can those two be reconciled?
I think it's going to have to be. And this is when I talk about at the end of the day, it being a tool. AI as a tool as much as Quark Express was a tool in graphic design. So, like I said earlier on, I was able to sort of see the end of keyline and paste up, which is the ancient way to do graphic design by hand. And
Mm.
with square T squares and a vellum, and like layouts took 18 times longer to do. So people were less experimental, and then but that was the process. And again, I got into it at the tail end. So I had this deep respect for, in my view, designers who designed with their hands. But then you get Quark Express that doesn't even exist anymore for the most part. It became the industry standard that really, did a lot of the work for you. It helped you understand typesetting in these ways that were, transformative. Like, did it kill or to take the humanity out of graphic design? No, but it really truncated the amount of time that it took to do the things. It lowered the barrier of entry to a lot more people to be able to enter the field and have a love and a passion for the thing. And that just continue to evolve. Now we're getting into a place where I don't care if it's, I'm typing into AI tools that are doing layouts for me, where now I'm not even all the way creating the layouts and the design myself. I'm sort of guiding it, or whether it's Minority Report where I'm sort of doing it with my hands, or a Neuralink with my mind. At the end of the day, I think they're still all just tools that allow from an idea or a thought into creation. And we will continue to need to be able to, like, we're not going to be able to slow this down. This is going to happen. But it is allowing us the ability to continue to cultivate and do it in a way where we don't lose our humanity. I will say my hope is that, and I haven't seen this in my lifetime, my hope is that we're able to do these shifts that in sort of amplify the ability to be incredibly efficient in these ways that would allow us to spend more time with our families, would allow us to be able to do more reading and be in nature more and do these things that we know have literal positive effects on our sense of humanity and our mental well-being and our sense of community, and not just sort of be more, not just put us in a place where where it's just asking more of us. Yeah, the way the internet did. So just in that, I know we were, connection became easier than it had ever been. And now because of the email, I'm never offline for the last 20 years. So I'm just pointing to my hope with AI is that we've learned from the mistakes in the past that we don't use what the technology is going to afford us to be able to do to put us in a place where we lose that opportunity to really lean into the things that matter most.
Well, I think that absolutely I would share that desire that we will have learned how social media damaged society and damaged relations and created, certainly in different parts of the world, a very fragmented social ecosystem and a very I use sort of a partisan discussion where we don't really have much affinity or engagement with people who think differently or believe differently than we do. It's a pretty toxic space. And with you, I would hope that humanity would learn some of the lessons that social media has taught us. I also fear that our track record isn't stellar. And so I'm not quite sure
Yeah.
what guardrails need to be put into place for that. But if I can pick on something that was mentioned in the discussion area, a question related to this was what are the no-go zones? Like what needs to be protected culturally, relationally, pedagogically as we scale these AI tools?
Yeah, that's a great question. What are the no-go zones? What needs to be protected? Yeah, I don't know. I think the things that come to mind for me mostly that need to be protected um, are the things that allow us to be able to have critical thinking. The spaces in which that strengthen our ability to discern information. Um, yeah, like the biggest issue with the tools being used as cheating tools or the things being developed in this way that take a lot of the responsibility of the thinking, I think um, the biggest risk is that we lose the ability to actually do the exercises. Like we at the end of the day, we've sort of lost the ability, like for to write, for example. I will say that like I know a lot of writers and I work with a lot of writers who say that they write to understand. And now that you don't have to write, essentially in many aspects, like with the use of a lot of the tools that are out there, are we losing some of the understanding in the process, or is our ability to understand getting weaker? So again, I think it goes back to the intention in which we apply in how we use the things, but it is a scary it's a scary thing in what I think where I think it could go. Even in myself, I've had to sort of measure how I use the tools, and there are times when I know that I can just kick something out and just jumping into ChatGPT or Claude or what, like the different things and be able to pump out all of these things. But I do think that there's a personal responsibility that goes into that balance of the utilization and when to pull back and really lean on your mind. And if there's one thing that maybe we could sort of, if we're imagining what an AI-centric school would be, one of the things could be the culture, like that learning of that responsibility, that the cultivation of that personal responsibility and how to use the tools.
And so going back, and there's just a small note, I just want to call it out in the discussion as well. There's a question on is AI just a tool, or is it something different? Is it something that's more actively a co-agent in our cognitive architecture that over time changes us and uses us in a very McLuhan-esque sense, and also redirects how we are. So there's certainly an open question. I'm sure you've heard in various spaces around, is it only a tool or is it something more? Is it a co-thinker? Any thoughts on that?
I don't see it. Well, it's a co-thinker is in that it can think with you, but again, I think it's very dangerous to see it as more than a tool, as more
Mm.
than a part of a process.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, so let's flip to a question that's been bouncing around as well a little bit, which is the tools that you use. So let's say today you're teaching a master class in this domain. We're all signed up as eager students to learn from you, Rob. How would you incorporate AI tools into both the curriculum, but also just the teaching, learning, and lecturing process? Like, and what would you, just to kind of land this discussion and move on from this, but how would AI tools touch this master class that you're teaching us?
Mm. Hmm. So I have this personal, so I, full disclosure, I have never taught outside of my children, but I have this desire to teach that I haven't quite activated yet. But when I think about teaching, my personal belief is that what often is the thing that is the most magical in
Yeah.
teaching experiences is an individual's ability to bring something to life. It's
Mm.
the sort of the combination of the passion or derives from the passion, but it's that passion's like ability to transfer the information to another individual or group of individuals in a way that brings something to life. And I do think that it's like how the failures of the traditional lecture model in education, and how, students are in the classes asleep, like, yes, there's attention, things that are happening, but at the end of the day, it's about the time and the care that goes into the design of how you are trying to transfer the information and how you bring it to life. This is a long setup to say, I would use first I would use them as a tool. I would use the AI as tools in which to bring uh, the ideas and concepts to life. I actually think it's a much better use of the technology than in like a ton of commercial applications right now, just because of the pushback to AI. But I would use it as tools to bring it to life when I think about the lectures. When I think about how now you can so easily translate ideas into stories that
Mm.
illuminate concepts. Like it's just not a land of words. It can be a land of images and ideas that translate again in the way that people are used to consuming information now, whether that's, more TikTok or social media driven. It's more visual. It's faster. It connects
Yeah.
on a human level. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I believe that's where I would personally begin thinking
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
And I like that framing, Rob, because you're not saying I will use tool X, even though I'd love to hear, are there certain tools you would use? But
Mm.
what you're saying is you would want to achieve a certain kind of an experience and then select the tools or resources that best enable you to activate that spark that you want to transfer into a range of other domains.
Yeah, I think it's about a means to an end. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we know the conversation out there right now is actually fraught, to put it mildly. Like AI is contested space and it's getting more contested. I
Mhm.
keep telling anyone who will briefly make eye contact with me that the resistance to AI is likely going to be the biggest social movement in history. because as AI takes jobs and as AI makes the possibility of it being poorly used and makes work dehumanizing, or makes a student review, like if I wrote a paper with my own brain, I would like another human brain to read it. Like, is it fair
Mm,
to give a paper that I wrote to a machine to review and then grade, even though we know the machine will actually give you a more accurate grade and reflection of
mm,
what you've done versus a human grader in many instances. At least when you're doing it with 100 students in a classroom. If it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-5 students, of course, the human grader brings all kinds of warmth and engagement they wouldn't otherwise. So I guess what I'm really stuck with is this anxiety that we are not doing AI right. We're not having the right conversations as a society. It's falling into very polarizing
mm.
camps. There's the limit AI, don't people who refuse to speak to AI and people who refuse to engage with it at all. Now that's of course one extreme, and there's the other extreme who stand to make an unbelievably insane amount of money from this process. So I'd love to hear from you around where are your anxiety triggers in this conversation socially? Never mind environmental and economic and the disparity and the minority populations that likely will be impacted more than others, and the lower income communities that are going to be impacted with massive data centers being set up. But where's your anxiety sit in this conversation?
I think my anxieties sit with, you pointed to just a minute ago, the our track record, and our ability to have new tools and utilize them in a way that is thoughtful, and in a way that enhances our humanity, versus just being still driven by capitalism and the desire to make money, and drive attention and keep the system going. I think that, with so I'm like I said, I'm a culture guy. And I will point out that, like, as someone is like, a culture is like an operating system. But there's a difference between culture and the culture. I think when I refer to the culture, I'm talking about the people that sort of are driving society and moving popular culture and moving us forward. I will say that the thing that is positive to me is that the culture has not accepted AI. They use it, but they have not accepted it in a way that the aesthetic, in the studies that we've done with young people, from the aesthetic, the use, sort of the, like, well, again, they're fine with it as a tool, sort of a transactional tool, but in the spaces in which it is largely um, utilized as a thing to sort of like replace aspects of how we understand our world, they have not accepted it. So that makes me happy. At least I know that's the reality for now. But yeah, again, the pieces that make me the most concerned are just that I know at the end of the day, like, we are largely driven by monetary gain. And my hope is that we just don't continue to sort of stumble our way through this. Yeah.
Hmm. As you're speaking about the culture and the cultural rejection, I've often argued that if you look at a scale of humanity's most sophisticated knowledge, I would argue we store our most sophisticated states of knowing in culture. And it's also, in some
Mm.
cases, the most durable, the culture that can persist even across generations. And that's related to the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell our children, because they're filled with purpose. They communicate meaning. They communicate a point you raised earlier, identity. They communicate who you are in this overall space. Um, and yet, by the same account, you're just seeing today, just to be clear, I'm not following Taylor Swift, but I did see that she lost 1 million followers on social media because of some use of AI in some of her recent work. And so it's like we're in this big social negotiation process around what
Hmm.
will we tolerate for someone to be doing with AI, and what are the boundaries that make it difficult. So this was a couple of years ago, and unfortunately there had been an incident of school shooting, and Vanderbilt sent out an email to students, just indicating compassion. And at the end of the email, they said, written with ChatGPT. And almost everyone who hears that has an immediate sort of like, whoa, that's, and of course there were some issues. People resigned, as you would expect, but there's something unspoken, or maybe we don't feel that it needs to be spoken, that AI can help us write an essay, it can help us write an email, but we're really reluctant to help it step into the space of care, into the space of that we think we've reserved for human connection. And in the same regard,
Hmm.
that's what you were just saying, right? That this idea that there are spaces where it just won't be tolerated by people if something that doesn't have the care and concern that we feel embedded into the creative process, even though you've heard of Tilly and other AI generated systems that are starting to get agents calling up to sign them to contracts. So there's a really murky space. And I'm curious if you think that space will evolve. Like, we don't tolerate it now because some of us might be whatever, but future generations will tolerate it in ways that
Yeah,
I maybe tolerate certain technologies that, the generation before wouldn't have tolerated.
of course. When I say that, I think that this is a train that cannot be stopped. I believe that, and I do think that it
Yeah.
will continue to get better. It will continue to get to a place where it can replace a lot of jobs and the need for a lot of people. But I the thing that if I can pull at something that I'm concerned about, I think a lot about the sort of epidemic of loneliness that is happening right now,
Mm, yeah.
sort of post-pandemic. And we know that, just through some of the work about, the struggles of Gen Alpha and Gen Z, and the mental health sort of, disparities that have been happening. I think that it extends beyond the youth. I think there's just generally a growing sense of sort of disconnection with people. So the more that we're able to figure out, or my fear is that we won't utilize this again as an opportunity to create space for us to design with intention more and
Yeah.
cultivate community.
Mm,
The ability for us to connect more with each other in person, with each other. When I think about the in spaces in real life, outside of just our digital existences, the more I know people are utilizing AI to as therapists and thing and leaning into it as a companion aid right now. I just think the more like that's a slippery slope that I do think we have to be very intentional about how we don't allow that to snowball and take us even deeper into like a sense of isolation.
mm. I love your use of the word intention or intentionality. I think that really is the core of it. And I've said in the past, like, I'd be fine working with university leaders who looked at the university they wanted to be. They looked at their students, they looked at their stakeholders, and they said, we're doing nothing with AI. Like,
Mm,
we're just going to be an on the ground, in person, high touch kind of environment, no AI ever. I'd be like, all right, I'm not sure if that's quite the best way to prepare them for a future job,
mm,
but
exactly.
I would laud the intentionality. Same thing with the university that says, hey, we've decided to sign with it. We heard our stakeholders, we evaluated the needs of our students, we intentionally took these steps. What I'm finding more often than not is someone signs a contract with a frontier lab, not a lot of intentionality. We may have spent way more time in committees talking about plagiarism than actual product deployment. So I think that part, I really want to double click on that word intentionality, because I think that's the core of how systems adopt AI.
Mm.
I'm going to ask you one last question here
Okay.
before we wrap up. And for the rest of you, we've got another 5 panels that are coming up. If you're in Huva, you'll see them coming up. It's really an outstanding list of events. I encourage you to dive into Huva and just connect on some of the boards or the panels, follow people, make new friends. But there's a question in the forum which says, what is one thing that you would recommend that we put into action based on what you've shared today?
Mm. I love that question. One thing we should put into action, I think that we should really deeply consider the people that are the most vulnerable. I sit from a place of privilege, as do many, I would imagine, many of the people in this. Um, and I think it's difficult to really see through the lens of the people that are the most vulnerable. And I'm looking at this through the lens of being someone from America. I'm from the south side of Chicago where there's deep poverty, but then there's sort of that on a global scale. Um, the people that are the most vulnerable, that have the least access, that have the least sense of agency, that have the least sense of representation in the development of these tools and the data that is informing and creating them. I think that we need to develop an intentionality around how can we think of them and how can we include them in this future that we know we will not be able to avoid.
It's fantastic, and comments in the discussion similarly validated their appreciation of that response. Probably one of the best comments that came in earlier on. Someone had posted, "Give Rob many opportunities to teach," and I think it's a fantastic validation of your insight, and certainly how much I've come to appreciate your wise, sage reflections.
I
Thanks
appreciate
everyone
that.
for Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining this discussion. Of course, we've got a very full next 3 days. All the sessions are recorded. We typically find, given time zones, we've got a pretty diverse group here, that you can't hit them all. They'll be up on the website shortly after the event sort of concludes. But again, thanks, Rob. Outstanding, and really appreciate the insights you've shared. And thanks to all of you for joining in. We start again in about 30 minutes.